In a quiet village nestled among rolling hills and endless fields, the nights were long and filled with the glow of lanterns, and the days carried the rhythm of hard work and simple joys. It was the late 19th century in rural America, a time when families built their lives around farming, community, and tradition. Among the many wooden cabins that dotted the dirt paths stood one small home where a young woman lay awake, her heart heavy with emotions she could barely name. Her name was Emily, a 22-year-old whose soft brown hair framed a face often full of warmth, but tonight shadowed by fear. She lay upon her bed in the dim glow of a lantern, staring at the flickering shadows dancing on the wooden walls. Her eyes were restless, her chest rising and falling with unease, as though the silence itself pressed down on her dot outside the small window. The moon rose high, casting its pale light across the village. A breeze carried the scent of soil and distant pine, yet inside the cabin the air was thick with a tension Emily could not escape. She shifted uneasily, clutching the thin blanket against her chest, as though seeking comfort from her own grasp. For days her mind had been clouded with thoughts, and tonight they weighed heavier than ever before. Not far from her bed, standing near the wooden window frame, was David, a young farmer of 25. His strong frame bore the marks of long days in the field, and though his hands were rough, his eyes carried a gentleness few noticed beneath his quiet exterior. He stood with his gaze fixed outside, watching the moonlight scatter across the dirt path, his jaw set, his thoughts turbulent. He had known Emily since childhood, and though their friendship had blossomed into something deeper, tonight he felt the weight of their closeness pressing upon them like never before. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint creak of the wooden cabin and the flicker of the lantern. David turned slightly, his eyes landing on Emily. She met his gaze for only a moment before turning away, her cheeks wet with tears she could no longer hold back. The sight pierced him, stirring a mixture of worry and helplessness in his chest. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning beneath his boots, and then he sank to his knees beside her bed. His voice, though steady, carried an urgency born of love. "Emily," he whispered, "you don't have to be afraid. I would never bring harm to you. You know my heart belongs to you, and I have waited for nothing more than to walk beside you." But Emily shook her head, her voice trembling. As she spoke, "David, I don't know if I can. My heart pounds with fear. I feel as though the walls are closing in around me." Her eyes shimmered in the lantern's light, filled with tears that reflected her conflict. The softness in her words carried more weight than any scream, for in them lived the fear of a future she did not yet fully understand. David reached forward, his calloused hand brushing gently near her shoulder. The touch was tender, more a plea for comfort than an attempt to persuade. "Emily," he said again, his voice breaking now, "I will wait. I will move as slowly as you wish. My love for you is patient. It can endure even this fear." The room seemed to shrink around them as the lantern hissed faintly. Emily drew in a shaky breath, closing her eyes as though trying to summon courage from within. But the storm inside her refused to quiet. Her chest rose quickly, her lips trembled, and then suddenly a cry escaped her, sharp, loud, and filled with anguish. It tore through the cabin like a strike of lightning, breaking the fragile silence. Her scream was so piercing that it echoed into the night, carrying far beyond the wooden walls. Outside, the stillness of the village shattered. Dogs barked, doors creaked open, and lanterns flickered to life as neighbors stirred in confusion. Feet shuffled along the dirt path, voices rose in alarm, and soon a crowd began to form near David's cabin. Men and women, young and old, held lanterns high, their faces painted with worry and suspicion. Among them was Elder Thomas, Emily's father, a man of 55, his hair silvered with age and his face lined with years of labor and leadership. He was known for his stern nature and unyielding principles. He had lived through hardships that had hardened him. Yet beneath the layers of discipline lay a heart that beat for his daughter more than anything else. His heavy boots struck the dirt as he pushed through the gathering crowd, his lantern swinging in his hand, his eyes burning with fear and fury. He reached the cabin door and struck it with the flat of his palm, his voice booming in the night. "Open this door, David. I heard a scream. What have you done to her?" The wood rattled beneath his pounding fists, and the villagers pressed closer, murmurs spreading like wildfire among them. Inside the cabin, David froze, his face pale, his chest tight. Emily sat trembling on the bed, her tears streaming freely, her body weak beneath the weight of fear and confusion. David turned to her, his voice low and urgent. "Emily, it's your father," he whispered, his heart sinking at the thought of what awaited him beyond that door. The pounding grew louder, more furious, Elder Thomas's voice like thunder rolling through the small home. "Open this door now, or I will break it down." The wooden frame creaked under the force of his strikes. David's breath quickened. He could feel the judgment already in the eyes of the villagers, the sting of dishonor, before even a word had been spoken. He turned back to Emily, guilt flooding. His voice, "I am sorry, Emily. I never meant for this. I never wanted to cause you pain." Emily's lips quivered as she spoke, her words barely more than a whisper. "What are we going to do? He will never forgive us." Her eyes darted toward the door, where the shadows of lantern light leaped through the cracks. With a final roar, Elder Thomas drove his boot against the door, sending it crashing inward. The wooden planks split, the hinges groaned, and the entrance lay shattered upon the floor. The crowd gasped as they poured their gaze inside, lantern light spilling across the cabin's humble interior. At the center of it all stood David and Emily, the young woman fragile and trembling on her bed, and the young man stiff with dread. Elder Thomas's face was a storm of emotions, fury burning in his eyes, fear twisting his brow, and sorrow etched in the lines of his mouth. His gaze swept over his daughter, weakened and vulnerable, and though his anger did not waver, a flicker of pain passed through his stern mask. The murmurs of the villagers filled the space, judgment hanging thick in the air like smoke. Some looked upon David with condemnation, others with pity, and still others turned their eyes to Emily with sympathy. The cabin was nothing but a chorus of whispers and the sound of Emily's sobs. Then, from the back of the crowd, an elderly woman stepped forward. She was known simply as Martha, her years exceeding 70, her back bent with age, but her spirit unbroken. She wore a simple shawl draped over her shoulders, and her eyes, though clouded with time, carried a piercing wisdom. Raising her hand, she silenced the crowd with a single gesture, her voice firm and commanding, though soft in tone. "Let us hear from the girl herself," she said. "No judgment shall be passed until Emily speaks." The cabin fell still, all eyes turning to the trembling figure on the bed. Emily wiped at her tears, her breath shallow, her hands clutching the thin blanket as though it were her only shield. Her father stood near, his stern eyes upon her, while David's gaze was filled with desperation and silent pleas for forgiveness. Taking a long, shaky breath, Emily found her voice. "Father," she whispered, her words quivering, we thought we were ready, but I was afraid. I could not bear it. My heart failed me, and I could not go on." Elder Thomas's expression shifted, his jaw tightening, his anger tempered for a brief moment by the sorrow in his daughter's tone. Yet his eyes quickly turned toward David, narrowing with renewed fury. "You knew better than this," he spat, his voice sharp as the crack of a whip. "You were trusted, and now my daughter suffers shame because of you." David stepped forward, his head bowed, his hands trembling at his sides. His voice cracked as he spoke, but he forced the words through the weight of his guilt. "I swear, to you, sir, I never meant to bring harm to Emily. My heart is hers alone, and my only desire was to show her my love. But I was blind to her fear. I failed to see her trembling, and for that I am deeply sorry. I cannot undo this night, but I beg for your understanding." The villagers shifted uneasily, whispers rippling through the crowd once more. Martha, the elder woman, stepped further into the cabin, her presence commanding respect. "Enough," she declared, her voice carrying like quiet thunder. "If judgment is to be made, let it be done with wisdom, not with wrath. They are young, full of passion and foolishness, but let us not ruin two lives in anger. Let us guide them instead, for only through guidance can they learn." Her words hung heavy in the air, softening some of the faces in the crowd, though others remained stern. Elder Thomas stood rigid, his hands clenched, his heart waging war between his duty as a father and the wisdom of the elder woman's counsel. His eyes darted back to Emily, who looked at him with pleading eyes, and then to David, whose face bore nothing but remorse. At last, Elder Thomas exhaled heavily, his fury dimming though not extinguished. His voice rumbled low, steady but firm. "Very well," he said, "but hear me, David. You will earn my forgiveness. You will prove yourself worthy of my daughter, or you will answer for your actions." His words were like iron, unyielding, but they carried with them a small opening, a chance for redemption. The villagers began to disperse slowly, murmurs lingering in the night air as they carried there lanterns back to their homes. The cabin grew quieter, though the tension did not fully leave. Martha laid a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, guiding her to rise. "Come, child," she said softly. "This night need not end in shame. Let it instead become the first step toward understanding." Emily allowed herself to be led away, her heart still heavy, but her spirit no longer entirely crushed. David stood alone in the doorway, his gaze fixed on her retreating figure. A fire of determination lit within him, though weighed down by sorrow. He knew that the path before him would not be easy, that trust once broken could only be rebuilt through patience, effort, and sacrifice. As the first hints of dawn began to break across the horizon, he realized that his true journey was only just beginning. The village awoke slowly after the chaos of the night before. Whispers carried from cabin to cabin, and every villager remembered the scream that had shaken their sleep. For Emily, the morning brought not peace, but heavy silence. For David, it marked the start of his trial. He rose before the sun each day, stepping into the fields while dew still clung to the grass. With sleeves rolled high and sweat pouring down his brow, he worked without rest. The soil became his confessional, each strike of the hoe a vow to do better, each seed planted a prayer for forgiveness. He spoke little, letting his labor show. His intent not from her window, Emily watched in secret. Her heart was torn. Fear still lingered, but so did hope. She remembered the shame of that night. Yet when she saw David's strength and determination, she felt the faint spark of trust beginning to return. A quiet smile sometimes touched her lips before fading again, replaced by doubt. Elder Thomas kept a close eye as well. He saw David's persistence, yet his anger was not so easily softened. To him, the young man was still both promise and danger. One afternoon, Thomas confronted him in the field. "You work hard," he said firmly. "But tell me, what did you take from my daughter that night?" David lowered his eyes. "I took her peace. I failed her when she needed me most. I cannot undo it, but I will bear the burden until I earn her trust again." The elder studied him, his expression unreadable. Words fade. Only endurance proves a man's truth. "If you mean what you say, then endure." David bowed his head. I will. Weeks passed. David rose with the sun, worked until dusk, and shouldered the stares of the villagers without complaint. Blisters lined his hands, yet his spirit never wavered. Slowly, whispers of judgment turned into murmurs of respect. Mothers spoke of his patience. Fathers nodded at his resolve. Even Elder Thomas began to sense the weight of his fury, lessened Aunt Emily, meanwhile, fought her own battles. Alone in her cabin, she replayed the memory of that night until tears blurred her vision. Yet the words of Martha, the wise woman, echoed in her mind. Fear is only a shadow. Shadows fade when met with light. One evening, Emily found courage enough to step to her window. David worked in the fields, his back bent, his shoulders heavy, yet his movements steady. Her heart softened, and for the first time, she let her gaze linger. When he looked up, she did not turn away. Instead, she offered him the faintest smile. That night, under the glow of the full moon, Emily walked to the riverbank. The water shimmered, silver, the air still. David appeared soon after, his steps hesitant until he saw her waiting. For a long moment they stood apart, the river's reflection dancing between them. Emily broke the silence. I see how hard you work. I see how much you carry. I am still afraid, but I see the man who is willing to endure for me. David stepped closer, his voice steady yet tender. I will wait for you, Emily, no matter how long. I ask only that. When you are ready, you let me stand beside you. Her hand trembled as she reached out, brushing his. This time she did not pull away. Instead, she allowed their hands to remain together beneath the light of the moon. And in that quiet moment, something fragile yet unbreakable began to grow between them, not built on haste or fear, but on patience, trust, and the promise of a love that could endure. The weeks rolled into months, and the story of David's labor spread across the village like wind through the fields. What began as whispers of scandal slowly transformed into talk of respect. The young farmer who once stood accused now bent, his back each day, not for pride, but for redemption. His hands grew calloused, his skin burned from the sun, yet his will never faltered. Elder Thomas watched with a guarded heart. He saw David hauling water when the well ran dry, helping neighbors, repair fences, carrying grain for widows who could not manage the weight. He said little, but in the silence of his own thoughts, the elder began to wonder if perhaps this young man's love was deeper than folly. Still, he remained stern, unwilling to yield too quickly. Emily's heart, however, changed more swiftly. She found strength in Martha's counsel, who visited often with words of wisdom. Love is not a flame that burns quickly, child, the old woman told her. It is an ember. It glows steady, even when winds blow against it. Do you see how he stands? That is not desire. That is devotion. One evening, Elder Thomas called David to his home. The air was thick with tension as the young man stepped inside, his clothes still stained with the dust of labor. Emily sat quietly at the table, her hands folded, her eyes lowered, but her heart racing. The elder fixed his gaze on David. You have worked hard, he began slowly. You have shown patience, and the village has seen it. But love is not only toil in the fields. Love is respect, trust, sacrifice. Tell me now, do you truly understand what it means to honor my daughter? David straightened, his voice calm but filled with conviction. I do, sir. It means listening to her when fear holds her back. It means waiting when she is not ready. It means placing her voice above my own desire. I failed once, but I have learned. Love is not taking. Love is giving, even when it costs. For the first time, Elder Thomas's stern eyes softened. A silence stretched across the room, heavy but not hostile. Emily lifted her gaze, her eyes shimmering as she heard the words she had longed for. Her father finally nodded, slow but firm. "Very well," he said. "You have begun to earn my respect. But remember, this journey is not finished. Love will test you again, and only in time will you prove yourself worthy." David bowed his head. "I will prove it with every day that comes." From that night onward, something shifted in the village. David was no longer whispered about as a reckless young man, but spoken of as one who had endured trial with humility. Emily walked with more confidence, her heart no longer bound in fear but opening carefully. Like a flower that chooses its season to bloom, the river became their meeting place. Beneath the moonlight, they spoke in soft voices of their dreams, their fears, and the promise of a future built not in haste but in patience. Emily, once trembling at his touch, now found strength in his presence. And David, once desperate too, claim her love, now cherished the slower rhythm of trust that grew between them. Seasons changed, fields flourished. The memory of that night faded into something else, not a wound, but a lesson. The villagers, who had once gathered outside the cabin in judgment, now greeted them with nods of respect. Even Elder Thomas, though never quick with affection, allowed the faintest warmth to enter his voice when he spoke to David. One night, as the stars shimmered above and the air was filled with the hum of crickets, Emily and David stood together by the riverbank once more. She took his hand in hers, her voice steady though soft. "David," she whispered, "I was afraid once. Afraid of myself, afraid of you, afraid of what love might demand. But now I see that love is not a storm. It is a shelter. With you, I feel that shelter. And I am ready, when the time is right, to build our life together." His eyes shone with quiet joy, his grip tightening around her hand. "Then I will wait for that day, Emily. Whether it comes tomorrow or years from now, I will wait. Because you are worth every moment." The river carried their reflection beneath the glow of the moon. Two figures bound not by urgency, but by patience and devotion. And so their story, born in fear and shame, transformed into one of endurance, forgiveness, and the kind of love that grows stronger, not in a single night, but across the journey of a lifetime.